Excellent day. In this presentation, we will be exploring the moles of a composition, empirical and molecular formula, and percentage composition. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Firstly, we have the mole of the composition. But what is a mole? The mole is a unit that measures the amount of a substance. 1 mole is exactly 6.022 times 10 raised to the power of 23 entities, such as atoms, molecules, or ions, of a substance. This number is also known as Avogadro's number. Here are 3 steps for computing moles of a composition. Firstly, we determine the mass of the substance in grams, then we find the molar mass of the substance. The molar mass is the mass of 1 mole of a substance, expressed in grams per mole. For a compound, this is the sum of the molar masses of its constituent elements. Lastly, calculate the number of moles by dividing the mass of a substance in grams and the molar mass of a substance in grams per mole. Here are a few examples as shown. Now let's move on and take a closer look at the empirical formula. The empirical formula represents the simplest whole number ratio of atoms in a compound. It makes no mention of the arrangement or number of atoms. It is standard for many ionic compounds and macromolecules. To compute empirical formulas, we apply these 4 steps. Firstly, we determine the mass of each element. Then we convert mass into moles by dividing the mass and molar mass. After that, we divide the number of moles of each element by the smallest number of moles calculated and convert it into whole numbers. Here are a few examples as shown. Now, as we have learned to compute empirical formulas, let's dive right into the molecular formula. The molecular formula of a compound shows the actual number of atoms of each element in a molecule of that compound. It provides more detailed information than the empirical formula, which only gives the simplest whole number ratio of the elements. There are 3 steps for computing the molecular formula. First, we determine the empirical formula mass. Next, we calculate the ratio of the molar mass to the empirical formula mass by dividing molar mass and the empirical mass. Finally, we multiply the subscripts in the empirical formula by this ratio. Here are a few examples as shown. Before we end this presentation, let us talk about percentage composition. Percentage composition is a way to express the relative amount of each element in a compound as a percentage of the total mass. It helps us understand the proportion of each element within a compound. So how do we compute the percentage composition? First, we determine the molar mass of the compound. Then we multiply the number of atoms of each element by its atomic mass. Lastly, we calculate the percentage composition by dividing the mass of the element in 1 mole and the molar mass of a compound and multiplying into 100. Here are a few examples as shown. I hope you learned something in this presentation. Thank you all for your time and attention today, and I hope to see you in the next presentation.